I have all those questions right here. It's live.
All right. Hey, everybody. How's it going? This is the Handouts podcast with me and Carlos right here.
Hi.
And today we have JB from the IID, director number 5?
Number 2, Division 2.
Mm-hmm. And we just had a little bit of a little intro that I wanted to get through because it was just an interesting way how we were talking about the podcast, on the podcast about certain things. So it stems from a discussion that we were having about the IID Recoast live stream, and at one point I spoke about the divide between the federal government and the state's government's vision, highlighting how the IID sits in the middle of that metaphorical battle. I further explained that the real reason IID must impose these rate hikes is due to Sacramento politicians playing politics instead of listening to the people. That is the true fight that the mysterious and unknown group of concerned voters that I was saying should be focusing on. I made my plea, and while Carlos right here was questioning whether JB would join us, he answered our call, and here he is. Great to meet you, JB, and it's
hello.
Good to see
Glad
you.
to be here.
Wait. When you were mentioning that, he popped up on the live stream.
Yeah, and he commented, right? So I don't know if you had a take on that or what I was speaking on. If you had a little similar thinking of how we're going to reconcile these two different visions between the state and the government.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the costs that are real, and we feel them across the board. Certainly, in the past couple of years, we felt them at the pump.
Yeah,
but ultimately, it's had its impact at our meter, at your house or your apartment or whatever, or your business. So what's been happening over the last 10 years? It was 10 years ago, back in 2015, 2014 era, that the prior board touched the rates.
Yeah.
Normally, good utility practice is that every couple of years or so, you're supposed to gradually
you get some kind of study going, right, to be able to figure out what is the best plan for everybody.
It's called a cost of service study, so you know what the cost it is to serve customers. And the district is very focused on being cost effective and having reliable power. And I think we often take for granted, we certainly feel that way in Coachella Valley occasionally when there's been a power line that gets blown down in a crazy windstorm, or we've had it in Winter Haven occasionally. And when you don't have power on, or particularly if it's in the summertime and it's really hot outside, you value power, particularly when you don't have it. And so we live in a very interesting place. We have a really extreme climate. It's beautiful right now in March, although it was 91 degrees last week or 92 in February. But for 4 months of the year, it gets really hot, and we use a lot of power. From the winter months to the summer months, our power usage quadruples, like it multiplies 3 to 4 times. It goes from about 300 or 400 megawatts between Imperial and Coachella Valleys up to about almost 1,200. So that's a huge swing. So now if you live in San Diego or a coastal place, or even a place where it gets cold in the winter, you may see some seasonal variability. But we are very unique in the sense that nowhere is it quite like this. Think about the different bills you pay, whether it's for your mortgage or for your rent or your car payment or whatever, monthly insurance. You're paying relatively the same amount per month. Maybe your grocery bill, maybe it picks up in the when you're having entertaining or your family or whatever in Christmas time, but nothing is it quite like this wild swing in the summer. So IID has basically the lowest rates in California, or some of the very lowest. There's a couple other small districts here and there. But we use a lot of power. So while you have low rates, you use a lot of energy. But ultimately, we also have, so we're unique in terms of our climate, but we're also unique in terms of how big the IID energy service area is. And let's zoom out for a moment.
I wanted to do a lot of that.
So IID is an electric utility. We're also we're a water and power utility. We're an irrigation district that's authorized under state law to do both. And that's really special and important that since 1911, when IID was first formed, we've been a community-owned utility, got into the power business almost 90 years ago next year. So we're able to chart our future as a community. We're able to target those investments that we want to see. And we're able to see our local priorities baked into what we're doing. This is very different for most Californians who live anywhere, whether you're in San Diego, whether you're in San Francisco, whether you're in anywhere that's basically not Los Angeles or IID or Sacramento, the city and county of Sacramento. Everyone who's not in one of those three areas, you are in a investor-owned utility. So that means it is a corporation that you pay your bills to, and they are entitled to, under state law, a profit. So 100% of your bill is not going to just pay for the service you're receiving. You're also paying for profits as dividends to shareholders, who then get to collect money to put in their pocket from your pocket.
And that's for private owned.
That's for investor-owned utilities. So that's Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, Pacific Gas and Electric. SDG&E. Yeah, that's in San Diego.
That as well.
Edison, and then
why they have so many problems, and
it's very expensive. They are now number one highest rates in the United States. They passed Hawaii Electric, I think, is the utility in Hawaii, who was formerly the number one most expensive. So we're very unique and very blessed that we have this community-owned utility that together we get to collectively determine what are our priorities. And the number one overriding priority of local people in Imperial Valley is we want affordable low rates. On the other hand, though, one of the unique facets, as opposed to what's different from an investor-owned utilities, we have a locally elected board of directors. And so we ultimately hold our board of directors accountable at the ballot box or in whatever forums, or seeing them in the grocery store or something. And so you hear about it. But over the years, some of the drawbacks has been there's been a lot of fear to be able to touch the rates. And the big problem with that is if you're not regularly adjusting either every year or every other year, you fall way behind. And so that's what's happened at the district. I was digging through a box sometime last year at IID headquarters, and I found a newspaper clipping from like 1997.
Oh man.
It was the Imperial Valley Press talking about the dangerous lack of infrastructure investment at IID.
Wow.
And nothing really changed from 1997 to now 2025. So we've fallen far behind. It requires a bigger adjustment. And so one of the things that we've enacted as part of our board policy, we've completely overhauled all of our policies as a board, but one of them is that we need to keep our rates current with the cost of service. That way we don't, this has been a problem in the past. Tell people we're keeping our rates low, we're not touching the rates, and then you've got to make a big adjustment, or the system collapses and people go without power, or there's not enough money to be able to restore power, or to be able to have sufficient power in the summertime, which was a real issue a couple of years ago. So we've made this adjustment. It's kind of surprising and shocking what it is compared to decades of decline and neglect to the system. So we're still going to be amongst the very lowest in California. Still, nonetheless, a change here is something that people notice. And putting things into context there as well, IID not only serves Imperial Valley Power, we serve out in Winter Haven, we serve a little bit of San Diego County and the Ocotillo Wells area, but really importantly is the Coachella Valley. Over 60% of our power customers in the Coachella Valley.
Wow.
In the Coachella Valley, there's a street called Washington Avenue. On the west side of that street, it separates the cities basically of Indian Wells, Rancho Mirage, Palm Desert, Cathedral City, Palm Springs. All those cities are in Southern California Edison. Their rates are about double or triple what IIDs are.
So your next door neighbor is paying triple, basically.
On the other side of the street, there was even a church in the past couple of years that was built, and they were going to have so the original plan was the church, they didn't know any different. They were just building based on this property. So the church was going to be in the Edison territory. They didn't know that. And the parking lot was going to be on the IID side. Well, the parking lot was just going to use, street lights. And this one was going to keep everybody, in mass or whatever in July.
Air conditioning, all that,
And so somebody tipped them off and said, like, you need to switch this around. So they ended up switching the footprint, is my understanding of this older project, because huge savings. Real estate agents in the Coachella Valley, they will show homes and say, hey, you will save this many $100s a month on electricity. And sometimes for some homes, I've heard, the mortgage payments can be smaller than the power bill in some cases. It's really wild. But so in the Coachella Valley, folks are very appreciative of the IID rates. They'll go move on one side of the street. The contrast is there. So you can see, how the other half lives in the case of the Coachella Valley and what you would pay for an investor in utility. In Imperial Valley, we don't have that same context. We just want to hold elected leaders accountable, as we should, about costs and wanting to ensure dollars are well spent. So that's what we've spent the past number of months here doing, is going through the process to figure out what are the real costs, what can we justify, what are the projects that we need to build, what's the reality of state regulations and mandates that have caused a lot of these costs. But ultimately developing and laying out a plan for what we need to do to have longevity, plan for the future. Because so much of the system, these lines, these wires, these substations, these power generation stations, they were built in our grandparents' time. And our sort of parents' generation wasn't, making the same level of investments, but ultimately it's on us to be able to do this. Otherwise, we are not going to have the reliable, cost-effective power that we want.
And everything's going to be breaking every so often too. So
it's not a good, position to be in.
So I have a question, because would you say that would you say that it has been IID's fault that the infrastructure has not been replaced? And if it is IID's fault, why should the people pay for it?
So the people own IID. IID is a community-owned utility, and ultimately the decisions that we as a community make in terms of the conversations we have, who we put in office, those affect and drive the decisions. So the decisions in the past were very much focused on not keeping up with costs, and it got very far behind. So, and I think that what you're getting to is this sense that certainly existed over the past number of years, this sort of divide between the community and IID, or IID is some distant entity. But the reality is, and one of my goals here, and I think shared by our board as well, is that we want to draw those closer together. IID is a community-owned utility, and that works in two ways. One is a recognition from our community that our community owns this utility. On the side of the utility as IID is that we're community-owned and we're responsive to the needs of our customers, our communities. So I think that's an important thing that we draw back together, because whether you have an apartment, whether you own a grocery store, whether you have a dealership, whether you have a small business on a main street somewhere in the valley, ultimately you are a co-owner of any one of IID's power plants or lines or transmission lines or whatever the case is. And so this is something that's really precious, something that's been neglected, but ultimately it's on all of us to be able to make the right decisions, even though they're tough, and even though the can has been kicked down to us all today. Ultimately, if we want things to be better, we've got to do something about it.
And that's why we elect the smart people to put in there to lead these conversations, right? Anything else?
I
had one more thing
in regards to the same topic.
Well, a little bit more towards the regulation side. I understand that 100% of our water comes through the Colorado River, right?
Right.
And of that percentage, we get about 27% of that water flow.
Depends how you calculate it.
Somewhere around there. That's what I was checking. So, being that we only get 27%, I think you have mentioned this, or you've commented on this before, that we are one of the most producing of vegetables and produce for the United States. How is it that we're only getting 27% of that water coming in, and we're struggling down here?
Sure. Well, I think many other communities throughout the Colorado River Basin, as I've had conversations about today, they look at IID very jealously about what we have and why does that very small population have such a large control over so much water. But ultimately what we have here, and the reason all of us live here, whether you're in agriculture or not, if there wasn't water here being put to use, carried, originally through Mexico, then through the All-American Canal, spread across what was completely barren desert. I mean, we are about the driest place in the country there is. We're hotter than Phoenix, drier than Las Vegas. So it's a challenging place to live, certainly without water and power also. But we're incredibly productive. We're the number 5 most productive ag county in America.
I think like 80% of our produce feeds the whole North America?
Yeah, there's a really large Yuma, Arizona. They tend to try to claim that they produce 90% of the vegetable or the winter vegetables, the lettuce and stuff.
That's
like
not what ChatGPT said, though.
Yeah, the reality is that a good chunk of it comes from either Mexicali here, Yuma area, but together this is a really productive area. The soils are really good,
fertile.
These are soils that have been deposited by the Colorado River over thousands of years.
All that minerals,
all the empty space in the Grand Canyon that was carved out by the Colorado River and deposited here layer upon layer. We've got ample water supplies that are really good, and then the climate. We don't love it here in the summer. However, 8 months of the year, it's amazing. And so it's a really great place to produce 365 days a year, where other folks, particularly in the upper basin states in Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Wyoming, you've got like a couple months or a number of weeks to be able to do things. And so we're very fortunate in that regard.
And that's what I want to let people know, the scale of it, right? So knowing that, also the one thing of regulations I wanted to hit on was, and what I always thought was, because Trump was saying, let the water flow, and obviously it's Colorado. But what a lot of the dams in California, they've been going through a lot of regulations through the past administration, right? Is the Imperial Dam, which is the one that supplies all the American Canal, right? Are they under the same type of regulations and are limiting us to bring in water to the American Canal?
So two different situations. One is what goes on in the rest of California, and then there's us on the Colorado River.
We're unique.
Fortunately, a much more functional, for the most part, system. In the way California water works, removing Colorado River from the equation, is you've got the Sierra Nevada mountains. So basically 2/3 of the population lives in Southern California, but 2/3 of the precipitation is in Northern California. So you've got the Sierra Nevada mountains that run a really long distance up the eastern side of our state, and that's where enormous amounts of snowfall occurs. Sometimes less, sometimes more, but that water flows west, it flows downhill into the Central Valley, or Sacramento Valley, San Joaquin Valley, and then ultimately comes together in the Sacramento area in what's called the Delta. So that's all these rivers converging: the Sacramento River, the San Joaquin River, the American River, and they converge in this really unique area called the Sacramento Bay Delta. And the original plans of folks in the 1960s was, let's take water. Well, originally in the Depression, in the New Deal, when Franklin Roosevelt was president, there was the Central Valley Project, which was to basically harness all this water coming directly off of the Sierra Nevada mountains and be able to build canals and structures to be able to take that water and put it to use in really productive areas like Kern County and Tulare County in the Central Valley, and move water around that way. But then the other idea that came about later was the State Water Project. So that was Governor Brown, our last Governor Brown's father, Pat Brown, when he was governor. He pioneered and pushed the State Water Project, which basically built dams up in Northern California, conveyed that water through a long canal that goes all the way from basically southwest of Sacramento all the way down to Los Angeles, and then ultimately that water makes its way all the way to San Diego.
Oh, wow.
That's a huge distance, but there's also huge need, particularly in urban Southern California, the LA metropolitan area, San Diego, Orange County, but also
the reservoirs, right? All that kind of stuff.
There's the Western Central Valley, lots of water demands too on the agricultural side. So altogether, that's a lot of important stuff on the California picture. It's challenging because that environmental issue that is the Delta. While there's this demand to pull water and move it down to Southern California, there's also environmental concerns. There's the Delta smelt, which is a small fish. There's other sort of Northern California environmental interests, farmers in the Delta as well, who are concerned about water and water being moved elsewhere. So the state of California is very involved in that picture, the state and the feds, and it's very complicated, and there's a lot of disagreement and litigation. What we have in the Colorado River is fortunately a much better sort of picture because there's a greater degree of cooperation over time. So what we have in a nutshell on the Colorado River is there's the upper basin states,
and
where most of the snow falls in the Rocky Mountains, and then there's the lower basin states where a lot of the water gets used, and then there's Mexico. So in the upper basin, you've got Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, Utah, and there's reservoirs called Colorado.
They split their upper basin.
Yeah, they split their water by a percentage. In the lower base, so then you've got Glen Canyon Dam. So that's Lake Powell.
Okay, yeah.
That's one of the two largest reservoirs in the country. The second and largest is Hoover Dam, Lake Mead behind it. Yeah. And so that's in the Las Vegas area. And so that we are 100% dependent on that. So if you live in Phoenix and you're getting Colorado River water that moves up a big canal that goes up to Phoenix and Tucson, you're dependent upon that water that goes through Hoover Dam. Yeah. If you're in LA metropolitan area, San Diego, you're depending on that water too. Palo Verde, 100%. Yuma, 100%. Mexico, 100%. Wow. Imperial Valley, 100%. Coachella Valley, they depend on Colorado River significantly. There's a branch of the All-American Canal that goes to Coachella Valley. They also rely on some other water supplies too, and some of those locations too. But particularly for Imperial Valley, this is our only supply of water. Yeah. So,
which goes to the Imperial Dam, right?
Yeah. So you've got Lake Mead, so it's Hoover Dam. Then downstream at Bullhead City is called Davis Dam. Then another one is called at Lake Havasu Parker Dam, and that holds water back so that it can be pushed up to metropolitan, so Southern California, and a big pipeline aqueduct system. And then another one, similar thing that goes to Central Arizona, Phoenix and Tucson. Yeah. Then downstream from that, there's a Headrock Gate Dam, which serves the Colorado River Indian tribes, and another one, the Palo Verde Diversion Dam, serving Palo Verde Valley. Then gets down to Imperial Valley, and we're served by Imperial Dam, which IID, it's a reclamation facility, Bureau of Reclamation, the federal water agency.
And it's shared between Arizona and you guys, no? Too.
That's right. So that one facility is really important. It's a dam like IID, you know, we think about our power bill and our power bill may be too high or whatever. And then IID does a lot across this really large area that's larger than some states.
That's what we're going to get into. That's why I'm trying to lay out this stuff, because it's very important that you guys are in the middle of all this stuff, that you guys are getting regulations to curb your water use, and then you guys have a Salton Sea that's now being a detriment to us and it's hurting our health. How do you guys reconcile with that? How do you...
Yeah, there's a lot of balancing acts that the district is in a position to balance various interests and various needs. So at least, you know, where we are at on the Colorado River is there's a long-term drought that we've been experiencing for the last 20 years. So there's millions of acre feet less water than we originally thought. An acre foot is like a football field, a foot deep in water. So Imperial Valley is entitled to 3.1 million acre feet per year. So imagine 3 million Calexico football fields under a foot deep of water.
Wow.
Or the football field 3.1 million feet deep in water, depending on how you think of it.
Yeah.
So we're entitled to these special rights that are very old and very protected. The idea of the way the Colorado River works is called the priority system, or doctrine of prior appropriation, or first in time, first in right. Yeah. So in the case of Imperial Valley, there was before IAD was around, there was a predecessor called the California Development Company. And they literally went and posted notices on trees, you know, with like nailing a note to the tree and then going to the courthouse in San Diego, because we were originally part of San Diego County, and saying, we claim this much water, 10,000 cubic feet per second, which basically equates to like half of the Colorado River's flows.
That's crazy.
At the time. And so so we've got these special rights, we've got these large rights, we put them to good use for our cities, for industry here, for agriculture. And so, but on the other hand, there's this long-term drought. And so even though we have priority rights, we still feel it's important to be able to participate. Yeah. It's better to be at the table than on the menu, which is where ideas been in the past. Historically, it's better to be leading the conversation than sort of following, whenever decisions get made without you. Yeah. And so it's important to protect our only water supply. But on the other hand, there's potential consequences, specifically at the Salton Sea. Less water being used here means less water in the Salton Sea. So you sort of have this dueling responsibility. We want to protect the Colorado River. We want to protect Lake Mead, which we're totally dependent on. Yeah. We also want to protect the Salton Sea here in our backyard, and it's an important balancing act.
Yeah.
So we got a question from one of our listeners. She said, when were we, this is reverting back to our conversation about the ID rates increasing, when were we, the co-owners, asked if we wanted to repair our infrastructure or let it rot?
Well, I think if you wanted electricity, I think it's going to be needed. That's the issue here is that, we're kicking the can down the road. It's very easy for the past people to say, oh, I didn't get to do it at the time or whatever. It's like there was reasons why they didn't do it. But I mean, it's very, like you're saying, you do this every year.
But that's a legitimate answer. I mean, if the people didn't vote on that.
No, but here's the way I can say it. Do you want to repair your bathroom in your house? Yes. I don't want to smell poop in my house, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to fix it. You're going to fix infrastructure so you can live comfortably.
I know, right? But the sentiment is, if I own it, like I should have a say in it, how it's fixed, or how much money are we going to spend,
or if we should fix it,
I mean, I know that we want electricity. That's obvious. But the sentiment behind the question is, we're co-owners and we didn't vote on it.
Yeah, so I appreciate the comment from Diana here, and I think what I've observed and what I think IID has sort of lost focus of, or the skill set over time, is being able to do active community outreach, to be able to do that information and share this information publicly. Surprises are not a good thing. Nobody wants a surprise, and nobody wants a surprise, particularly on the price of anything. When we have egg prices or gas prices or whatever, housing prices. So what we're going to be doing, actually, Diana, in the next number of weeks here, IID is initiating an open house series. We're going to be hitting every single community across Imperial Valley. Cool. And I wasn't able to attend one of these sessions, but this is a sort of another issue, but there was a company that's building a transmission line through the area. This is sort of like an interstate highway of power to sort of link different parts of the Southwest together.
To Yuma?
Yeah, that one. So what they did, and I thought was very nice, although I didn't attend this, they sent invitations to everybody within the area that could be potentially affected. They invited to an open house, and there was people who could answer questions. You could walk around and get information. And so that seemed to have been a very effective forum. So we're actually modeling off of that. We're going to be launching this in the month of April. So we will be coming to Heber. We will be coming to Island and Sealy and Holtville and El Centro and Imperial and Westmoreland and Calexico and La Quinta and Indio and Coachella and Quetzon tribe. So we'll be hitting every single community. This would have been great had it occurred beforehand. We're still building that capacity within the district to be able to do that communication.
Yeah, I think so too. It would have softened the blow of the light show at the fairs, because what I heard, a lot of people were frustrated. It's like, how can they have so much money for the light show, but then charge us with these rates? It's like, I get it. So
it is a big company, and I think one of the things that we are looking to make better. We've inherited the way things have been done over time. And over budget cuts over the years, being able to keep up with costs, something has to give. And unfortunately, being able to do community outreach was deemed inessential over the years. So we don't agree with that. And so ultimately we're making these priorities, and we're going to be doing this outreach so that each one of these questions, so people can know more about IID and know about their role as co-owners, as Diana well put it, of this system, to be able to know about the state of the infrastructure. We had mentioned it and talk about it, but people were like, well, that's good. I support infrastructure investment, but what's going on? Be able to present those facts and show images and show what the state of critical pieces of infrastructure, like our Yucca power plant that we own, that we collectively own in Yuma, the state of El Centro generating station on the northeast side of El Centro, the state of many of our transmission lines, our distribution infrastructure, all those power lines in your neighborhood, the state of how many of those poles need to be replaced. So about IID, what is the state of our infrastructure? Talk about the rates. Here's what was done. Here's why it was necessary. Here's what it's going to fund. Critically, then talking about individually, what are these projects that we're investing in? Where is your money going? Because unlike investor-owned utilities throughout California, it's not going in the pockets of somebody to pay for profits. IID is 100% nonprofit. 100% of the money that you pay on your power bill is either paying for fuel to be able to run the plants with, so natural gas. It's to be able to buy power on the market when we cannot produce that much in the summer months because the demand is so high, and it makes better financial sense and it's cheaper for us to go and do that, or to pay for infrastructure, either new infrastructure that we need or to replace aging infrastructure, or to or for the people who run the district, the guy who goes out at 3:00 in the morning, who's a troubleshooter, and goes and inspects a power line when the power is out at your house, or you have a neighbor who is on a medical device and needs power and the power is out, and he's having to go out in the dark with a flashlight to go identify that. So these are all the number of investments that we need. And I think the fourth thing, in addition to those, what is IID? What is the state of the infrastructure? Why are the rates necessary to make these investments? What are the investments that we want to make? And then the other thing is that we've taken an action on recently, which is our public benefits. So those are state mandated charges, 2.85% that's added onto your bill by state law. And it's actually a pretty decent thing. And it gets spent on two things that we have. We've got payment assistance programs and energy efficiency or energy savings programs. So the payment assistance programs that we've just overhauled, one is called READY. So that's payment assistance, 20% for income qualified folks, 30% if you're income qualified and a senior. We have CARE, which is another program, which is...
So those are funded by the same bill that we get?
That's right. If you go in your bill, you'll see something called either PBC charge or public benefits charge. It's 2.85%, like a little tax sort of a thing, required by state law. That money is collected by ID and then gets spent back on you, either for payment assistance or energy efficiency.
So that's where the 81 million for this summer is coming from?
No, that was a problem with the energy cost adjustment. So the PBC, public benefit charge, that's different from the energy cost adjustment. That was that wacky thing that got really out of control. So if you checked your bill and you were on rants and raves or whatever, and people are upset, what is this surcharge? What that was basically, you've got a couple things on your bill, three main things on your bill. You've got a base rate, which is how much does it cost normally to serve power. You've got the energy cost adjustment, which is if the cost is higher or lower, your ECA will either be above zero, or less than zero. For several years, back in like 2017, 18, and 19, the ECA was negative. Many people realized or paid attention, but it was actually subtracting from your bill. You were getting paid back because the base rate was actually higher. It was collecting more than was necessary. So IID was cutting you back a check basically in your bill and reducing your bill. And then the third, so there's the base rate. That's what the cost of service goes into, finding rates that are necessary to be able to recover the cost of service. Energy cost adjustment, the cost, just like at the gas pump, sometimes it's $6 a gallon, as it was 2 years ago. Now it's, I don't know what it was today, $3.85 or something when I was filling up, whatever the price was. So sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. You can do your best guess, but the markets fluctuate. Russia invades Ukraine, like cost of natural gas went up crazily. And then the third point is the public benefits charge. So that's 2.85% for folks who need that assistance, whether they're elderly and they've got medical equipment that they need, or whether it's income qualified folks or seniors who are qualified as well. And then the energy savings, everyone's eligible for. So if you've got a refrigerator and it's old, IAD will pay you $50 if you want to get rid of your refrigerator
and get a new one
and take it away for you for free. You can get $2,000 in value. There's a company that the district retains. They'll come. They'll do an energy audit on your home. They'll give you ceiling fans.
They did it to our new house, and it was really nice, really nice. Good service.
So it pays for that too.
Made it to where, you know, because we had an old house and a lot of the things that made it to where the air goes out and it stays in, or it doesn't go out and it stays in. That kind of stuff, the ceiling, that was perfect. I mean, that was, we didn't have to spend on anything. It's just awesome. So, there's a lot of great things that they have.
I have a question. Here you said IED provides power to 165,674 accounts across a 7,000 square mile service area, including 101,471 in Riverside County. So my question is, how much money per month from all those accounts does IED get a month?
Per month in Riverside or overall?
Overall, yeah.
So it depends throughout the year, as I mentioned earlier. So basically, the amount of money that comes in on a monthly basis is the same as the amount of energy usage, which is the same as the temperature, basically. So in like the lowest use month is February or March. We're about the same. Usage is very low. So between Imperial and Coachella Valleys, that's 300 megawatts, 400 megawatts maybe is being used. In the summertime, like in every year that goes by, we're hitting a new peak, either in like
That's
August
fucking
or
crazy.
September. There's like always a crazy day in September that's been coming
Yeah.
about.
So
for the
in
next
February,
past
like how
few
much
years.
money does?
Good question. I'd have to get back to you on that. But
Yeah.
it's basically like a third or a quarter of what it is in August, which is the highest, July, August. Those are the highest use months
Yeah.
when it's hot outside.
So my
and the
question
air
would
conditioners are
be,
running.
would there be enough money there to fix the infrastructure?
In 1 month, you're saying?
No, of course not.
Oh, okay.
Of course,
You're saying
there's
in a
not
whole
one month.
year?
I'm just saying, like, no, it's not just 1 year. It's year after year. Like, would there be like if you take a percentage out of what IED makes each month?
ID doesn't make any money. IED recovers the costs that are necessary to be
Mhm.
able to pay for
Staff and
the staff salaries. So
Mhm.
the guys running around, the linemen up when it's
yeah.
109 or 100,
But
110 degrees in August when it's
I mean,
humid
somebody
after
has
a
to be
hurricane.
making money.
No, it's a public.
It's a publicly owned utility.
Yeah.
There is zero profit. So the investor-owned utilities in Edison, PG&E,
Okay.
San Diego Gas and
SDG.
Electric,
So those are making.
there's the owners are not the residents of
Yeah,
San Diego
okay.
or Edison
Yeah.
service area or Northern California. The owners are stockholders
Yeah.
and they make investments and they want a return on their investment. And under state law, they're entitled to a return on that investment of, I forget what it is, like 10% or something.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, but 100% of your bill in the case of IID goes to actually providing that service to you to pay for that generation plant,
Yeah.
to pay for the transmission lines, to be able to carry it from that power from El Centro down to Calexico,
Yeah.
to then pay for the substation and maintain,
Mhm.
operate and maintain the substation and the transformers that are at that
Mhm.
substation, and then the lines that then go, on the power poles, individual distribution poles that then go to your house, and there's a transformer little can on there, and then that goes to your house and then to your meter. Your bill goes to pay for everything that's associated with that. Not only that, the regulatory issues, the compliance, the legal requirements, the staff, the finance people, everybody that's necessary to be able to run this complicated outfit that we're really fortunate to have.
I have a theoretical question. What if they were to, how like this, the federal vision is obviously get away from all these electrical mandates and all that kind of stuff, right? If California were to say, okay, let's go with what the federal vision is, do we save a lot of money? Is there potential a lot of money that could be saved through the regulations that California is putting on you guys?
So the California regulations have added a lot of cost that otherwise would not be there.
Like electric vehicles.
The electric vehicle, let me give you an example of the
Yeah.
electric vehicles. Right now, IID under current state law, which we're actively working to change.
Mhm.
So we have a bill that with Assemblymember Wallace in the Coachella Valley to
Oh, really?
make an effort to change this.
Interesting. Okay.
So IID is required by a certain year to have all electric vehicles, and by I forget what the date is, you have to start buying these things, and so
2030
yeah, and
or
so
35, I forget.
the problem is, particularly on the power side, those vehicles don't exist yet.
No.
We've got a few electric vehicles that are not obviously the first choice. And like,
Mhm.
for instance, like IID will participate now in parades and participate in Dippy Duck and, people like that.
Yeah.
So purposefully not having sent those electric vehicles because there was concerns that they could not actually finish the parades.
Oh my god!
And you can't even order some of the equipment and the vehicles that the district needs to be able. Imagine this: it is August, and there's been a microburst storm. It's humid, it's hot. There's a storm that's come through on the eastern side of the Coachella Valley. We've had this happen multiple times, and it knocks out 15, 20 poles.
Wow.
Where this happened in August as well,
Yeah.
in Winter Haven, and you had dozens and dozens of poles get knocked down. So you got to have guys, linemen, who are out in trucks, and they work practically around the clock. They've got shifts. They need to be fed and kept cool. And is your thing still running there? It may be.
that may be a problem.
Well, we're still live. It's just a camera.
Okay.
I mean, you could continue talking.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, you got to have people in trucks to be able to go turn the power back on.
Yeah.
And that requires oftentimes going into really remote areas out in the middle of the desert. And the problem is
There's no chargers out there.
yeah, there's no chargers in the middle of the desert. And you got to keep those vehicles running at full blast air conditioning. They're also used to like cool off the employees when they need to take a break. Like they've been up on, in a bucket, changing wires and doing whatever else for hours on end and they need to, cool off. Those batteries don't last all that long. So this is a real issue. There's been lots of exemptions for emergency vehicles, for fire trucks and police vehicles, but that hasn't been extended to utilities. So that's a big cost. They're way more expensive and they don't exist yet. So those are problems. And then on another example, those Enhero trucks that drive around, the little white F-150s delivering, opening gates to cities and farms and whatever. Right now, you need one like F-150 or Dodge or whatever the cheapest thing that they buy at that time is. But in order to move to electric, you need to go from having like a vehicle that's like, I don't know, $30,000, $40,000 into something that's now basically $80,000, $90,000.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of options out there.
Yeah.
And on top of that, now you need to have two, whereas you used to have one, because you need to have one charging while you have one out in the field. So the costs are like more than double or triple for the car, the vehicle itself. And then you need to have two of them. So those are exploding costs that are coming from state mandates.
And that's from the state mandate, right? So isn't that the job of the board, since you guys represent the people, to stand up against those mandates?
That's right. And we've got a bill in the legislature this year. Fortunately, California Air Resources Board, CARB, looks like they're going to be like taking it seriously. We had to put this bill out and say, we're serious about this.
So you guys are...
Yeah, and we've got some very active staff who are highly motivated because they're going to be the ones having to comply with these laws that cannot be complied with, and
because
so there's strong motivation.
It seemed like you guys were just kind of bowing down to whatever.
We want to have a good relationship with the state. On the other hand, and we don't need to pick fights that are needless. On the other hand, we need to be serious about some things, and this is a really serious issue. Like people will go without power if we have dozens of vehicles out in the middle of the desert that are dead, and that's a problem. Yeah, that's falling short of our responsibility.
So that's what the IID recall should really be going after, right?
Before you move on to that, I have another question.
That was just something I wanted to add into it.
So you mentioned a pup fish. Is that what you mentioned earlier?
No, the
smelt. We have a smelt-like thing here. Okay. So in the Sacramento Bay Delta, they've got a Delta smelt, which is a problem for pumping water and taking water to Southern California. Here, we have a unique challenge, which is we've got some endangered species that live in our area. All around you, if you're walking down a ditch bank, you'll see a burrowing owl.
Oh, yeah.
And
okay,
so
I was going to ask you about the burrowing owl. Okay.
That's a whole nother one.
I was going to ask you, because here in the New River, they spent like $35,000, I think, to remove
just to bring an EPA representative.
So my question is this: how much of that is hyperbolized, or how much is like it's okay? Let's go spend $35,000 for burrowing owl.
I don't know about that issue, but right now the state is looking at potentially listing the burrowing owl, which is like a protected species at the moment, to going to endangered status. Oh, wow. The unique thing about them is it is sort of a species that's been impacted by development and so on and so forth. But 75% of the state's population lives here, not just in Imperial County, just in Imperial Valley. Wow. They love it here. They love living underneath a lined canal. Like another animal will burrow in. The burrowing owls don't burrow themselves. They go basically
and steal someone else's
squat and steal somebody else's burrow. And the whole valley is amazing for them because it's just a huge buffet. There's insects and lizards and little mice and whatever else. And so they love the climate. They love the habitat. And so
they weren't originally from here, though, right?
Some maybe, but basically they've
migrated.
They've multiplied, because it's an amazing place for them. Other places, like in the Bay Area, it's a different situation. They've sort of been wiped out in some places by development. But here, they think it's great. So one of our arguments, that we're working as part of this process is like, look, if you want to work to protect the owl and other places in the state, that's important. Go ahead, feel free to do that. But recognize there's no problem here. They live by the many thousands.
Multiplied like crazy.
They're in really good shape. So IAD has a program in place. They're in this environmental section within the water department that goes out. They monitor the burrows. They will stop construction activity. If there's active burrows in place, they'll wait until the breeding season is over, and then they move out, and then the construction will happen.
And that is a salary position for someone to be in.
There's
IID?
a whole environmental compliance team to be able to keep up with
within the IID?
state and federal. Yeah, to keep up with all the state and federal environmental rules.
Yeah.
So I guess my question was, in this example of Calexico and the New River, was it really necessary to spend $35,000?
Well, just to explain a little bit, the state wanted the city of Calexico to work on the New River project, right? And before they can start the project, they found Brunellos in the thing. So the city had to contract someone from the EPA or somewhere in the state to be able to do what they were doing at IAD. Couldn't they have asked you guys to do that?
The district uses outside consultants and support as well. It's necessary a lot of the time. So I can't speak to that example, but definitely complying with increasingly onerous state rules is a real cost. And it ultimately gets passed down to us as water and power users.
Right.
So piggybacking off of that same question, is the dust problem at the Salton Sea, is it how they're saying it is, or is it being hyperbolized so for state grants and state money? Because the Salton Sea has received over 700 million.
And nothing is. Well, I mean, there's some.
there's some
on,
haystacks,
right?
But like I'm saying, like that's what
a lot of money for
for some haystacks, you know. And it's like you could have paid me $40.
Haystack.
There's a couple things going on at the Salton Sea. So there's water quality and then there's water quantity. The water quality issue is that the Salton Sea used to have less salt in it, but water evaporates out of the Salton Sea, salt stays behind.
Yeah.
In the Colorado River, for every acre foot, so that's like a football field foot deep, every acre foot of water, there's 1 ton of salt in that water.
Oh,
so
wow.
By the time it gets down here, it's not fresh, Rocky Mountain snow melt. There's salts and from other places down the river. So multiply that by 2.6 million acre feet of water that flows through Imperial Dam down to Imperial Valley every year, and then farmers flushing those salts out as they have to do to be able to keep the ground viable out to the Salton Sea. That's 2.6 million tons of salt every single year, and you multiply that by many, many years.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of salt. So over time, the Salton Sea has become saltier. So that's created an issue where there used to be lots of birds that would come through the area. They would enjoy the fish as a buffet, and then they would take off or hang around or do whatever they would do. It supports the specific flyway, 400 types of birds that fly from like as far south as Argentina all the way to Alaska or even Mongolia. And so the Salton Sea is a really important stop for them because
Well,
like 97% of the wetlands in California are gone now. Or
at a certain point, because it wasn't a natural thing. It was something that an accident.
It existed over time, but not really in a permanent state. So occasionally the Colorado River would either go into the Sea of Cortez, as it does today, or it used to sometimes
trickle down.
There was lots of silt, and then it would flow this way, and we're below sea level, and it would create this big lake that went basically from Palm Springs all the way into the Mexicali Valley, called Lake Cahuilla. And so that existed over many thousands of years. The last time it was around was
from what I understand,
100 years ago.
I was looking on the internet that it
ChatGPT.
Yeah, that it said that it was in 1906 or something like that. There was a dam that burst and more flowed, and that's where it created a big old lake.
So the valley first got water from the Colorado River in 1901. So that was going pretty well. But the problem was Colorado River water had a lot of silt in it. What they used to say, it was too thin to plow and too thick to drink. It was basically muddy. And so like a farmer in 1901, he'd be irrigating his field, and by the end of the day, his ditch would be completely filled in with silt, with mud. So this was a real problem. So when they had the diversion works out on the Colorado River, and before the All-American Canal, which we take for granted today, our water went through Mexico and came back around. And there was a few different points where water came across the border into Imperial Valley. IID actually, for a period of time, owned a company in Mexico to be able to operate the system, which is interesting, and got rid of it in the 1960s because it served its purpose.
Yeah.
But the original point was there was lots of silt, there was lots of problems. They were constantly having to move the diversion structures there. And at one point there was a flood, and they were trying to do some work, and a massive flood happened. And so it blew out the diversion works, the entire contents of the Colorado River. did what it had done over thousands of years, which was sometimes flow into
Salton Sea
these,
area.
The Imperial Valley, and what was now the Imperial Valley rather than just the desert.
Yeah.
And so, that created the Salton Sea, but the Salton Sea shrunk over a number of years.
Yeah.
And so, fun fact, the Salton Sea today is at the same level it was in 1940.
Oh, wow.
What then happened thereafter is continued water use and growth of the valley. There was more water being used, more water in the sea. Sea got bigger. But as soon as, a number of decades ago, we started conserving water, the sea has gotten smaller. And particularly conservation to meet the needs of urban areas are part of old agreements that have been in place for the last 20 years. That's meant less water in the Salton Sea.
Yeah.
That's meant the Salton Sea has shrank.
Yeah.
More playa has been exposed, and that creates an air quality concern.
And the salt coming off
that has to be addressed.
Yeah.
Now, we've got terrible air quality issues to begin with.
Yeah.
Whether it's pollution in the area or off of the desert.
Yeah.
There's horrible, the big haboob dust storms that we get occasionally,
really
those come off of the desert. But still, taking care of the dust issues at the Salton Sea is important, even if it's not the biggest component, but it's really expensive to do. So like there's a big project the state of California is doing right now called Species Conservation Habitat. It's a 7,000 acre wetland to basically create these ponds and islands to be able to bring back the fish, and then for the birds to come back
in the Salton Sea.
It's in the very southwestern corner of the sea, basically, north of Westmoreland.
Yeah.
So that's huge.
Yeah.
There's other projects the state is building. There's one by Bombay Beach that's basically going to take water that otherwise flows into the sea, spread it out, create wetlands, and then sort of suppress dust and build habitat that way. Then there's other projects that they're sort of experimenting. The whole Salton Sea is like all the mitigation efforts are like a science experiment. They're trying things out. So the hay bales, while you could look at them and they're sort of silly seeming, they're very good at suppressing dust, because instead of wind blowing at 30, 40 miles an hour across this flat surface and picking up the dust, those bales or surface roughening or whatever slows the wind speed down, drops dust out, and then
doesn't take it all the way.
And that's been a relatively cost-effective measure, but there's more expensive ones, but there's only so much money to go around, and the state of California doesn't always want to make this number one priority.
We got another comment here. Can you comment on the recall threat we just saw come out?
Sure. I think the board right now is focused on doing the right things, focused on customers, getting our infrastructure back in place, and being able to deliver relief for our customers.
Yeah.
We've delivered $81 million for this summer. That's going to be a 25% reduction in the summer months. Plus, we have another $10 million package, $5 million for payment assistance for vulnerable customers, as well as another $5 million for energy savings to be able to allow any customer to reduce their energy usage by becoming more efficient, paying less, and get these improvements for free or heavily discounted. So there's a lot of complicated issues out there. There's lots of different interests and stakeholders that the board is having to balance, and we're committed to doing that. There's lots of different needs that we have to address, whether it's power consumer, in Sealy, or a Coachella Valley developer with lots of demands, or an Imperial Valley farmer with certain ideas, or another state that we're dealing with, on Colorado River issues, or dealing with any of our local partners here on the ground. There's a lot of different interests that we're having to work with, but I think we're single-minded in our focus to deliver the cost-effective, reliable service that our customers need, and making IID into what it used to be and what it needs to be moving forward, which is a valued, trusted partner in our community, part of it, and not separate from it.
We have another question here. Ask him this. IID has faced criticism for internal conflicts and governance issues. What steps are you taking to improve transparency and rebuild trust with the community?
So we just undertook a process that took about a year, which is to completely redo our governance at the district. Many of these issues are none too different from any city council, school board, whatever. But the basic element of what we tried to do here was take a look at how are we performing? How have this board, prior boards operated in the past, and being able to basically hit the reset button and do the best possible policies that will not just be in a book and a binder and there's policy, but guide how we actively do things.
Actually be
so to
practice.
take you through what that looks like. We've got 3 buckets of policies. There's called governance process that applies to us as board members. There's board staff linkage. That is, what does it look like between us and our direct reports, which is general manager, general counsel, internal auditor, and what are the specific delegations of authority and expectations that we have to general manager. And then the third bucket is called strategic direction. That's, here's the goals we want to see done, and we will evaluate based on whether these things are being carried out or not.
Yeah.
So on the governance side, there's been a lot of improvements to the way an ID board meeting functions. If you watched ID board meetings in the past, they were very colorful, and lots of people would watch them because I was in the line at Target one day and I was waiting, and the self-checkout wasn't open. So I'm there with my cart, and there's a woman who looks around at me and she says, are you Hamby from ID? And I said, yeah. And she says, I watch your meetings. They're very entertaining. And I said, well, they're not supposed to be.
We're there to do work. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's been one of my goals. And I think the board collectively has been working to achieve this, which is to make ID boring again. Focus on the important stuff, get it done right, and not have it be.
Is it like Canadian politicians like yelling at each other?
Oh, no. Yeah, the things nowadays are pretty tame, but meetings used to go from like sometimes 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. There was no need for that. There were closed sessions touched on things that were
weird,
far beyond what was needed to be discussed in closed
10
session.
different awards on one day and different presentations and all kinds of extra stuff. It's just like,
we want the district to be efficient. And we want to be efficient, set standards there as well. So at least on the board side of things, the board works really well together. It's 5 representatives across the valley who represent these 5 very distinct, unique areas that have their own unique interests and constituencies and communities. But ultimately work together. And so that's one part of the governance process, is establishing better norms about how we work together. The second, the board staff linkage, like having clear delineations of authority to our general manager. Here's what we're allowing you to do. Having the flexibility to transition some things away from the board, providing more accountability, but also saying we're going to have a higher degree of trust, but there's more accountability with that too. And then the third one is strategic directions, which is specific goals. This is what we want to see done. This is like the year we want to have it done. Or here's the metric we want it to be done by. And the other thing is, every single meeting, we basically end the meeting with what's called policy monitoring. So we've got like 10 policies in governance process. We've got like 15 or 16 in board staff linkage, and we've got 10 on strategic direction. We review each one of those policies between 1 and 4 times a year. So we have a whole schedule and a calendar. So at every meeting, we take an action. How are we doing with this policy? Are we complying with it? Are we not in compliance with it? Do we need to take steps to get into compliance with it? And there's been some occasions where, particularly on the governance policy, the stuff that applies to us, we've said, we're not living up to what we think we should be doing. So we've taken an action, said, we're not living up to it. We're partially in compliance. And we basically say, here's what we're going to do to get us to where we need to be. That's really good best practice that I encourage other agencies to do. It really focuses you on what you need to do and the long-term goals and the best practices, rather than day-to-day and political stuff.
And making sure that the things are getting done.
Yes.
Right. Well, how other ways are you going to do it? Right. For Calexico, I've known that this is always happening. You know, there's times where like, are we good for that agenda item? Because I was on the commissioner for BID, Business Improvement District, and we would be talking amongst each other, and they're like, yeah, I already sent it to the city. I mean, the city is not getting it done and putting it on the agenda, right? Because you have to have it about 24 hours before it's the meeting takes place, right? To let the public know and all that kind of stuff. All those processes were not done. So I see what you're saying. It's very important. It's very important because people need to be doing their job when they're told, right?
And so, and one of the things we noticed was like micromanaging. You hear that phrase occasionally, but what does it mean in practice?
Yes.
As public servants, you need to be you are elected by the public. You're accountable to the public, and the public expects you to ensure that the agency or the utility that the community owns is run efficiently, nimbly, appropriately. Yeah. And so what we figured is important is we don't need to do the micromanaging. Every board member is not a subject matter expert on everything. That's why you have people hired to do those jobs.
Yeah.
And so provide that delegation. Here's what we expect you to do, but here's the standards we want you to meet. Yeah. And there are positive or negative consequences to meeting those standards or not, but they're clearly communicated. You evaluate every so often. It makes for a much more nimble an effective process where the board takes a look at the long-term strategic issues and then let the staff people do the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
And then you have clearly defined roles, and everybody can, staff roles are not supposed to be policy roles.
Right.
Board roles are not supposed to be doing day-to-day. So we've clearly separated those, and we continue to want to do a better job at that. But it makes things much more functional between staff and the board.
Yeah.
It makes things more functional between the board members themselves. And ultimately, this is a process that we're undertaking. Make a utility that everybody is a lot happier with and knows is accountable and has a clear direction. That's otherwise,
oiled machine, basically.
That's, I think, important.
Yeah.
There's, I'm touching on a larger political theme right now. There's the Doge stuff and thoughts about making government efficient and so on. And I was reading something the other day about, there's two sort of rival perspectives in the general discussion right now about government, which is some just want to sort of smash government, and then there's others who just want to protect government. But at least my focus and what I think we're doing at IID is trying to make government more effective, make it efficient, but make it effective, so that we do the things that the people of Imperial Valley created IID to do, which is to provide that cost-effective, that reliable power that we all want. And to make a well-oiled machine, but have a machine that works. Don't smash the machine, and don't say there's nothing wrong with the machine. Make it work as everybody expects it to.
Yeah. And is there any, because I know I asked one of the board members of Imperial County if there is some jobs that need to be Doge where they're just sitting at home. Would there be anything like that at IID? No, right?
So
it's more hands-on.
One of my things was when I first got on the board and I was running back in 2019, 2020 was like I was very committed, particularly in COVID. I think we forget now. COVID was like 5 years ago now.
Yeah,
it's like
crazy.
It was forever ago, and the world is completely different as a result of COVID.
What I want to know is, did you run to get toilet paper when it ran out?
I didn't do a run on the bank. I was a responsible consumer.
Yeah.
So, at the time, like the economy was really bad. You had restaurants, people doing very poorly. And so I was very committed to I want to know what the plan is. I want to make sure that we're efficient as we can be before we even talk about the idea of doing a rate update. And so what I learned over my first 4 years in office was, wow, we've got some real problems. There's some real investments that should have been made a long time ago.
Yeah.
They're a lot more expensive now because post-COVID, the supply chain issues, the tariffs, everything else is very expensive. So had we made those investments a long time ago, it could have been incremental. We could have made incremental changes, just like people, for the most part, get a cost of living adjustment or a cost of minimum wage goes up over time.
Yeah.
You had fixed revenue but growing needs. And so there was a real deficit that was created.
Yeah.
So there's a number of areas of the district that have suffered as a result. They've become less efficient because there's less people to do the work that's needed to be done. So that's created a problem. So, which is a really good example. Like I think we could identify in various agencies, lots of opportunities for improvement. Yeah. In the case of the district, there's been significant cost cutting over a very long period of time on both water and power, but ultimately you can't keep doing that forever. And and so still, even though with additional revenues that are going to be used to be able to fund these important projects, we still have to maintain that ethos of being good stewards of the ratepayers' money, even if we have the ability to have additional revenue to do what's necessary rather than just out of necessity to live with, what was available.
Well, what do we got? Yeah.
There's a question here from Gonzalez Armando. Imperial Valley has significant lithium reserves. What role do you see IID playing in the development of the lithium industry? And how can it benefit local residents without repeating the mistakes of past resource booms?
I think, starting off with that last bit of the question, I think we've all been aware of the different resource booms. Is this going to be the thing that changes the valley, or solar, or the sugar cane, or this or that? And so lithium is an opportunity for sure. There's a need for geothermal power. There's a need for there's a need for lithium batteries, whether it's for your phone, your laptop, camera, whatever. Or ID operates batteries at large scale. We have one. Another one is being built. There's a third one being talked about. Those are needed to be able to like basically be reservoirs for power.
Mm-hmm.
And electric cars that are being mandated, we'll see what that ends up looking like. But certainly, so there's a big need for lithium. There's lots of places that are competing for that. You've got hard rock mines in South America. You've got new deposits being found in Arkansas. There's stuff in Nevada. So this is a really unique reserve and resource that we have here. The district's role is really focused on the water and power sides, to be able to provide that transmission capability and working with those geothermal companies to be able to export that power out of the area for the geothermal power that's being created. And then on the water side, to be able to work with the companies to be able to provide the necessary water resources, despite the fact that we're in a drought and despite the fact that we have various lawsuits from previous years that sort of allocate who gets how much water, and still comply with those court rulings. So the district is around to be supportive of those efforts. I think largely those market opportunities will be led by the market, but the district is here and around to be able to ensure those opportunities move forward, and ultimately those other larger discussions about the larger community things. I think the county is sort of taken on that role.
I think what he was specifically saying, also the resource boom, was that when solar, like you were saying, when solar came, we gave a big old piece of land for producing, power for San Diego. So some of that stuff, when people hear, they hear as, just people who are everyday citizens. They're not understanding this kind of stuff. They're like, well, why are we giving them?
Solar provides zero value for the valley, and that's not an IAD decision. That's all. That was the county is the land use authority.
Okay.
So the county permits and provides the CUPs and whatever to be able to zoning changes to be able to allow that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
More solar in the valley is not helpful.
Yeah.
Solar in the desert, that's fine. But the problem is when you replace every acre of solar that you put in, that's less water going to the Salton Sea. That's less jobs that are being maintained here. Sure, you get some hotel stays, you get some, journeymen slamming panels from LA or, Riverside or something, and they come and then they go. Yeah. And ultimately what we're left with is a lot of black glass, dust, environmental impacts, and ultimately all for what? To be able to provide power to another area that we don't benefit from a single watt of power from.
And that's where I always want to be able to research before I get to say anything, because then you look dumb when you do it, because you really need to understand who's doing this. Another question?
Yeah, Maritza says, did you provide a chart to understand which improvement projects are to be completed as considered within the increased calculations?
Yeah, great question. And this is something that we'll be rolling out in the month of April. So ID throughout the entire month of April, starting on April 1st, will be hitting every single community in the Imperial and Coachella Valleys to be able to present what is IID, what are the real needs on the infrastructure side, what are the rates that have been updated and why, and then importantly to this question, what are the projects? There's a lot. So when you attend, which I encourage everybody to attend one of these open houses, you'll walk in, you'll see a room filled with poster boards. You can walk at your own pace. You can ask all the questions you want of any of the IID staff or board members in there and say, what's this about? Ask questions. But the biggest section of them all is discussing the big infrastructure projects, largely generation on the front end. So we have huge needs. That Yucca power plant that IID's had since the 1950s or early 60s has died, basically. And that was something like 75 megawatts out of our peak of 1100. So that was a real workhorse for the district that has died.
So when did it die? Well,
in the last couple of years, we basically had to pull the plug on it because it was so unreliable and had so many problems that it wasn't worth trying to work with.
Could that been a factor to what led to then the increases a little bit?
Yes, the ECA costs went out of control because the generation that we had, instead of being able to provide locally generated power with no profit involved, IID owned, operated, community owned, operated generation. Instead, we were having to buy from private companies who
at a higher rate,
a margin of return for profit. So that's a real issue, and having to buy on the spot is not a good situation to be in when everybody's clamoring for the same thing too.
What they should have done is given that city credits, what do they say, those green credits or something, just to give us the power at a nice price. You know what I mean? That way it can
level out those costs, and we're not paying so high at certain points. You know?
Yeah, and there's good opportunities. The district offers a program called average billing,
Yeah.
where you can even out your bills throughout the
So
course of the
whole
year.
year is the same.
You pay the same amount of money.
Yeah.
To be clear,
Mhm.
like at the end of 12 months, you will pay the same than if you had paid month
Yeah.
to month. But
Yeah.
the reality is that, particularly for our population here in Imperial Valley, different than Coachella Valley,
Mhm.
there's a lot more need in economic stress and participation
Yes,
or
yes,
payment
yes.
assistance programs.
I feel it in my own business.
Yeah, and so when your
Yeah.
bill triples
Yeah.
or quadruples in the summer because
Yeah.
you're using triple or quadruple the amount of power,
Mhm.
and then you're paying very little in the winter months, for a lot of people, having those stable costs throughout the year make a lot of sense,
Yeah.
because that's like how most of your bills are, and your ID bill isn't.
Yeah.
So it's an option that we provide. It's not the default option. I think there's a good argument to be made that having it
should
as the
be.
default option would make people happier.
Yeah.
But folks don't want to be mandated to do one thing or another, even if it's a choice either
Yeah.
way. But
Yeah.
the average billing, I think, it's an amazing tool that makes your bills predictable
Mhm.
and more affordable throughout the year, so you don't have crazy bills in the summertime.
Yeah.
Okay, I have another question, and this is from Janet Wilson from Desert Sun that I've been reading off of. The increases the first in 10 years will also, for at least a few years, replace unpredictable bill spikes under spot electricity cost adjustments that have sent summer bills skyrocketing in recent years. According to Gina Dogstatter, that's what we were talking about, huh? But what caught my attention was unpredictable bill spikes under spots.
Yeah. So by being able to have rates that actually recover the cost of service, the ECA goes away. So there will be no ECA, presuming the assumptions that we made
You've
hold
already
true over
explained
the
this.
next
You've
several
already
years.
explained
Yeah.
that, huh? Okay.
So it'll go to zero,
Okay.
which is much more predictable.
Okay.
Still, the rates you're paying are going to be higher than, well, it's actually about this. Well, here's the way it was before. You were paying 11.64 cents residential for your base rate. Plus there was ECA on top of that. So what's happened is the ECA has been moved into the base rate where it should be. The ECA goes away. So when you're going to check your bill starting, this month or last month, when you check the ECA charge, you're going to see a nice zero. But when you get to June, July, August, and September this year, you're going to see a negative ECA.
Oh,
You're going to see a big ECA reduction per the board's action at the last meeting, because the ECA had all kinds of issues and problems. There was some level of over collection. So we're wanting to zero out the books. So there's going to be return of
everything.
ECA back to customers.
Hmm.
So you're going to see zero until June, July, and August, September. You'll see it go down by 25%, your overall bill. And then after that, it'll be back to zero. So unless there's some terrible, crazy event where the ECA needs to kick in, we're not anticipating ECA being seen for a long time. The other thing is getting back to best utility practice every year, going through, doing the budget process. What are the needs? And then being able to set the rates to be able to recover what the budgeted community goals and needs are.
And also check your goals from the prior year, see if you've completed any.
And then update those rates so that and the way it works now is we're setting the rates every 4 years, but then we're setting rates for 4 years every 2 years. So 2 years will go by, there'll still be 2 years in place, but then we're going to add another 2. So it's constantly being addressed, so you're not going to see crazy spikes in the future. You'll know exactly what your bills are going to be. The district can do better long-term planning and not getting, a decade. Or so the last time the rates were updated was 2014. The last time before that was 1994. So by doing this every couple of years, it'll get a lot easier.
Eventually,
Customers will start to get used to the idea, like, cost of things does go up, but by small amounts, not big jumps.
So we got more comments now. Besides the recent increase for residents of the Imperial Valley, besides the recent rate increase for the residents of the Imperial Valley, do you foresee any more increases in the next 5 years? If so, why and how much percentage would you say?
If you'll be able to. We wouldn't be able to know how much increase. Right?
So we set it for the next 4 years. So that's all on the ID website. If you go to id.com/rate info, you can see the whole chart. It basically shows everything through 2028. At 2028, it's 0%. There's no change.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll come back to this probably, every 2 years out into the future. Go through, make those incremental adjustments at minimum. And this is a big issue so in addition to the aging infrastructure, in addition to the cost of natural gas and fuel, purchase power going up, there's inflation.
Yeah.
You have to keep up with the cost of inflation for employees, keep up with the cost of inflation for materials. So we're so far behind just to begin with, just for like 10 years of inflation. In the last 10 years was a crazy amount. Since 1994, it's like 107% rate of inflation. And we'd only adjusted collectively over that period of time was only like 8% adjustment,
and you only looked at it once, right?
Yeah, and so the cost of rates only went up 7%.
Yeah,
the overall rate of inflation was 107% over 30 years. So at minimum, like keep up with the cost of inflation. Everybody should be getting their cost of living adjustment, be able to keep up incrementally. When you go to the grocery stores, the cost of everything goes up just due to inflation, not like hyperinflation. Which we've been experiencing now, which made things worse. But just the regular small incremental changes over time.
Make sure you're being constant on it.
That's the important thing. It should be scarier for people to not look at things and not to keep rates updated. It should be scary to do that than to just like hide your head in the sand for a decade at a time and then make a big change on customers. So unfortunately we had to do that, make that necessary adjustment, make that update, but here on out it'll be much better. So still we're committed to the communication with customers, and we'll have these open houses where customers can ask any questions they want about power, and there'll be folks there to answer and provide information.
So we have another question.
This is the one I was talking about, the stipulated order mitigation on Red Hill Bay. They're saying that why did the irrigated vegetation not happen, and what do we expect to see the gravel implementation on site? I mean, would that be IID that's working on that, or that would be
there's an area called Red Hill Bay. There's a Red Hill, which is like an old extinct volcano.
Oh wow!
On the southeastern corner of the salt.
For the geothermal,
there's a lot of geothermal in the area. That's why there's several old volcanoes. They're called the Salton Buttes. There's Obsidian Butte. There's like Rock Hill. There's Red Hill Bay. There's mud pots. Several mud pots that boil up out of the ground.
By the way, I love this. I love talking about history. This is my number one favorite subject.
It's pretty cool. So that whole area,
it's geology, dude.
There's the San Andreas Fault is rubbing again. It's rubbing, and it just the sea happens to be on top. There's no connection between the sea and the geothermal. They're just there at the same time. So anyway, so Red Hill Bay is one of these locations, and there's a lot of geothermal activity nearby. To the south, there's Berkshire Hathaway, BHE. To the east, northeast is CTR, Controlled Thermal Resources. So there's a lot of it, and just to the further to the east, I guess there's other ones. But as the Salton Sea was projected to recede because water conservation was happening in Imperial Valley, less water to the sea, one of the first spots to open up was called Red Hill Bay. So there was originally some ideas by some folks at the Fish and Wildlife Agency, which was, hey, let's pump water from the Salton Sea, let's mix it with Alamo River water, make a nice blend of water that the fish will like. So not fresh water, not super salty water, just the right mix, Goldilocks style. And so the birds would come and eat or eat the fish and so on. So there ultimately was a number of issues with the project. The level of Alamo River dropped. It became sort of infeasible to build the project. It was a multi-agency thing. Red Hill Bay, which was this first area that was exposed right next to this Red Hill, which is also a county park where they have a mobile home park there, interestingly as well.
We'll have to go check that out.
So it was exposed. The project wasn't able to move forward. There was an action by the Air Pollution Control District in Imperial County saying that there was air emissions. There was a dispute about that. Ultimately, there was a settlement between IID and the county to do an air quality project. Ultimately, I think there's some concerns about the cost. Over $30 million to be able to apply 3 inches of gravel on several hundred acres. Is that the best use of the money? Are there other tools that are cost effective? Certainly, everybody would love the vegetation and the wetlands and stuff like that. And fortunately, we've got 7,000 acres of that occurring by the state at the species conservation habitat north of Westmoreland. So that's good. And then there's Bombay Beach, and there's a few other projects around. And then there's other cool wetlands that operated nearby. IID built some mitigation wetlands south of Nyland called Managed Marsh. So you can go up hunt and do other things if you'd like. And
interesting.
It's a cool area.
And it's thriving.
The Minage Marsh, yeah, that's thriving. Red Hill Bay is just a large piece of land that at this point there was some air quality tillage. Basically, you go through and you till it. That stops the air from blowing so fast.
Yeah. Like the haze, what they're doing.
Yeah,
basically.
and so it's like 97 to 99% effective. And so the question is, do we want to spend $30 million to get the last 1 to 3%?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe, but I think there's other things that we should think about exploring with those large public monies.
So there's another comment here. Jasmine Phillips says, I'm curious how the 2024 deficit irrigation program DIP affected the pupfish drain habitat, and to what extent did monitoring detect low levels that required trucking? Didn't you talk about that already? To supplement drain flows to ensure protection of the endangered desert pupfish.
So the pupfish is an interesting creature. They're about like half the size of your pinky.
Wow.
They are sort of spread throughout the desert. It's a little fish that lives in the desert.
It eats algae or something.
They eat different things. They turn blue when they're mating, bright blue. They are critically endangered in some places, but like the burrowing owl, they're very populous here in Imperial Valley.
Yeah.
So let me give you a counterexample. In there's a place near Death Valley National Park in Nevada, and there's this pupfish called the Amargosa pupfish. He lives in a table or in a pond in a hole that's about the size of this table here. And so it's that big around, and it goes like straight down like an elevator shaft. And so this pupfish, this particular species, only lives in that hole. And so if there's any groundwater pumping or anything nearby, it could potentially affect the hole that they live in. And there's like a little shelf that they eat algae from and stuff.
Yeah.
And that is the only place in the whole world where this particular species of pupfish lives.
Interesting.
So
who identified this? The state of California that they were there?
They're listed in the Endangered Species Act, so federal. But they're cool. I have a pupfish hat. I'm very pupfish positive. And I'm all about protecting the
check
pupfish.
that out.
But in Imperial, so they used to live all over the place. They used to live in the lower Colorado River. They don't live there anymore. But where they do live is they used to live in the Salton Sea. But then the Salton Sea, here's the other thing about the pupfish. They live in the desert, which is strange, right? In these little
ponds or
river
areas,
or washes or like small amounts of water. They can tolerate extreme heat, like water that's upwards of 100 degrees.
Wow.
They can tolerate really salty water.
Wow.
They can tolerate very little water. And they turn blue when they're mating.
They're frogs, basically.
So they're very neat. And so there's a lot of them that used to live in the sea. Somehow they got in there.
Yeah.
But the sea has been too salty for them. So the idea, we have canals, right? You got the All-American Canal, it distributes to these big canals. Then you got fields that the lateral canals deliver water to. And then there's these drains that take the drain water, runoff water, and then those go into the New Alamo River. But if you're near the Salton Sea, those drains used to connect directly into the sea, or still do. So the thing is, the pupfish decided this is too salty. We don't like living in the Salton Sea. So they migrated upstream into the drains. And so there's like several, there's sections of these drains that these pupfish live in until there's a check structure and they can't make it to the next bit.
Yeah.
So they live in dozens of miles of drains, which we might not think of as like amazing habitat.
Yeah.
But very similar to the burrowing owl. The burrowing owl loves life here, and they live here
crazy
in huge numbers. Same thing with the pupfish.
Wow.
There is enormous amounts of pupfish in those drains.
Yeah.
And so one of the concerns with the DIP program was, by conserving water, and particularly in fields adjacent to the Salton Sea, by using less water, was there going to be a potential to limit the flow of water coming off of farm fields going into the drains into the sea? Would that potentially impact a pupfish under endangered species law of state and federal? So ultimately, IAD engaged in a really complicated, expensive monitoring program to be able to measure how much water was in those individual drains. If there was found, like an alarm went off that the amount of water in the drain was too low that could impact a pupfish, that there would be dispatched, sort of like 911, but for pupfish, there would be a water truck and go dump water into the
just
drain
to save them,
to be able to
Let
keep
them
water
live.
flowing.
Yeah.
And also there was limitations on how much people could participate in this conservation program near the sea because of the concern of if there was to be a potential impact on the pupfish. So lots of activity went into that. There's a whole environmental division within the district that handles all these unique, complicated issues. And so we're working to protect the pupfish, which are thriving.
I had never even considered that there was something like that here in the Peel County. That's crazy.
You can't really see them or find them.
Yeah.
ID operates a pupfish refugium.
Oh, wow.
It's a refuge for pupfish, and they live near the ID's main power plant, El Centro generating station. So there's a pond where the pupfish are held and they're maintained.
Let's go get a tour.
So there's a steady reserve of these pupfish that live there.
We should go get a tour.
Yeah.
We're doing public tours also. This is another thing as part of ID's active effort to increase our community engagement.
I'd love to go take a video and do that. That'd be cool.
Offer public tours.
Yeah.
Educational.
Is Javier Gonzalez the tour guide?
No comment. No comment.
Okay, let's see here. Will you consider community oversight with regard to the project rollout to ensure community input during the delivery and implementation?
I think she's talking about the project rollout, as in going and speaking to people, right?
Right, which you have.
There's dozens of these events that are, or I think 17 that are going to occur in April, and so we encourage everybody to attend those, as many as you want. If you want to, like Pokemon, collect them all, you definitely can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And there will be on different days or same days or how?
I don't know. You
want to ask her?
What this? I don't know if he's joking or his important question. Is it true that DP Doug will no longer be the ID's official mascot?
I'll say this certainly one time. That is 100% fake news.
Okay.
He's now and will continue to be the official mascot.
He's actually my favorite between that one and what is the one from the... there's one where he has a cape or something. They had just made him.
Maybe somebody else.
Yeah, I think the board of supervisors maybe had.
The Air Pollution Control District. So
there you go. Yeah, he had a cape.
I forget his name.
Yeah, that wasn't really good, but Dippy Duck was my favorite.
Marita says what she meant was establishing a community committee as oversight. Is that kind of like a planning commission type of deal?
I'm not sure, but happy to always entertain opportunities to get more input. I think that's something we want to make up for and do a lot more of.
There is committees within IID or no?
We've got some board committees, but
subcommittees.
Yeah, things like that. But I think there's always interest in being available to learn more.
Yeah. I don't know what else. I think that was it. I think one more thing. I don't know if you wanted to answer. There was this Z Global company that I think in 2014 had a lawsuit, but then recently someone was saying, "Well, why are they getting another contract?" You wouldn't know anything about that, right?
Yeah, not terribly aware of that situation.
Yeah, I figured. What else? You had something else, Carlos?
Well, there's a whole lot of. I don't know.
We could do another one if you're willing to do another one. These are fun. I love this, learning about, that pupfish. I didn't even know that it was a thing. So something like that where, we're reading about the delta smelt, fish or whatever, right? And then you're like, well, we have something like that similar, so making a video, we would do that. Me and Carlos would love to do that, get a tour and then do a little bit of a video. That'd be cool.
Well, for me, some of the takeaways, or one of the takeaways that I got was, for example, learning that the Yucca, is it the Yucca power plant? That it expired a few years ago.
Very important plant, and basically you have massive needs in the summertime to keep those air conditioners running. Yeah. Think about that. When you're hopefully keeping your air conditioner at 75 degrees or 78 or something and not really cold in your house, that air conditioner is sucking a lot of power, and that's why your bill is super reflecting that, as opposed to your bill in February or January or March. So that power has to come from somewhere. So going backwards, so you've got your air conditioner, and then that connects to your meter, and then it goes to your distribution pole, and then from there it connects to a substation, then a transmission line, from the transmission line from a IID generation plant that can look different in different places.
Yeah.
So there's El Centro Generating Station, which has several power plants on that campus.
Yeah.
So we got one major replacement that we need to do as part of this big infrastructure investment. The other is Yucca. That one has to be completely replaced because it's sort of like when you have a car and you've had it for a long time, and you can either choose to completely make all the
where is it located at? Where's it located?
It's you can see it when you're going to Yuma. So when you are about to cross the Colorado River,
the 98 or before?
No, you look off to the right hand side of the road, and there's a power plant. It's like right on the Colorado River. It's sort of where Mexico and Arizona and California all come together in that particular spot.
It's right by the casino.
Yes, it's right by there.
Okay.
I know.
So that's a critical piece of infrastructure that like I was saying about the car, at a certain point, you've had your car too long, you've kept your car for 15 or 20 years, like you're spending more on trying to keep the car alive than you could actually, buy a new one.
Right.
So that's what went on with that, and that decision, had to be made. And then there's other plants we have, like our hydroelectric facilities on the All-American Canal.
Right, I was going to ask about that.
Which are very cost effective, but there's original propellers still spinning in those hydroelectric cars.
Older than us, probably.
Do those get like the bearings on them must?
There over the years has been a basic amount of maintenance, but because of cost cutting measures over decades period of time, like the hydros particularly have gotten the short end of the stick, even though
we should get a tour of one of those and show
everything.
We've got a whole tour program coming together
and explain how that works.
It's very simple. You got water, gets checked up, it then spins through these propellers, and then the water moves downhill to be provided to our cities and farms.
I think that would be the best thing you guys can do, is to show and tell.
Yeah.
Right. Show what we're paying for.
What I think is show, not tell. You can tell people. I can talk for all lengths of time. You can tell people stuff at a board meeting, but the reality is you need to show them what you're doing, and that's where people will appreciate.
And that will be convinced, and then having a media and stuff like that. Hopefully not, bashing you guys, making more of like, hey, let's learn about this stuff. That what we try to do here.
Well, you guys could have an entire YouTube channel just about the ID.
There's YouTube videos being put up. There's
educational,
active work being done. If you go to the IAD Facebook page, there's lots of videos. Like, this is National Ag Month, so there's a lot going on there. But as soon as the open houses, start going, there'll be a lot of educational videos
or a weekly show.
Power. I think so, or at least weekly news updates.
Yeah,
I think
weekly show with Alex Cardenas and JB Hamby.
there's lots of stories to tell at the district, whether it's environmental, whether it's power generation, whether it's customer programs, whether it's Colorado River situation. Yeah, the IAD is a really important agency that we all collectively own and benefit from. Yeah, and so it's important to tell that story, or to show people what's going on. And I think there's a lot of appreciation and pride that I think we all should have.
Yeah. And then you're just not a piece of paper with the bill on it. You're actually, real people that are working to provide power, and look at all this infrastructure that we have,
Make life and progress possible for our communities.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So we've been going on for an hour 30. I think we're getting there.
Is there anything
you wanted to say? Or
I just encourage folks to come out to the open houses. I think there's a lot of work that we're excited about doing to be able to get the story out about what collectively people may not realize, and it's ultimately on IID to be able to show and tell the story. Yeah. And so next year is a very important set of anniversaries that I think about a lot. So it's the 125th anniversary of water reaching Imperial Valley. It's the 90th anniversary of power being provided here by IID, and it's the 115th anniversary of IID as well. So there's big milestones on water and power, and ultimately our community is tied to Imperial Irrigation District and the services that the district provides to make life and progress possible here.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen.
So just one last thing. Another takeaway that I got was that 2.5% that comes out of each bill.
Yeah, 2.85%.
That goes back into the community.
It's collected as a result of state law, but then what we get to do is come up with put together programs that benefit people directly. Right. Whether you're
I think that's important.
income
That's really
qualified,
important to
and
Sure.
not only that, but also this $10 million additional investment we made into that. So that demonstrates our commitment to wanting to make sure, while these updates to our power rates are important, while this infrastructure is critical to continue to provide reliable service, we need to be thinking about customers, those who are income qualified, those in the difficult scenarios who we always think about first, but also every single customer who would like to see a smaller bill, who can benefit from having a more energy efficient home or business, and be able to reduce bills, reduce costs. And by all of us conserving power, we see a lower bill, but it also ultimately, particularly in the summer months, lowers the cost for IID to be able to provide power, which then lowers the costs on everybody's bills collectively, in addition to individually.
Yeah. All right. Thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
All right. Thank you.